It's been so many years, so many memories. I miss them all terribly, but I hold them here in my heart.
The last time my daughter told me she loved me, she was holding a pen for me to sign my life away. Of course, I didn't know it then. I thought it was just paper, just ink, just another Tuesday afternoon with the scent of rain on the window panes. But her voice, you see, was just a little too smooth, like cream poured over poison. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. And her eyes were fixed on the old house around me, not as a home filled with memories, but as a vault she had finally found the combination to. She wanted my home, yes, but it was more than that. She wanted to tear down the walls that had witnessed her childhood, plow over the garden my Thomas had planted with his own 2 hands, and build something new and sterile in its place. She didn't just want my inheritance. She wanted my history erased, leaving me a ghost in the ruins of my own past. And the most terrible part? I let her. I smiled back and took the pen. Before the chill set in, my life was a simple, warm thing. It was measured in the rising of bread dough on the counter and the slow tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock my husband Thomas had cherished. Our house isn't grand. It's a 2-bedroom cottage with floorboards that groan like old friends and windows that rattle in the winter wind. Every chipped piece of furniture, every faded photograph on the mantelpiece tells a story. There's the worn armchair where Thomas used to read the paper, its fabric thin and soft from the thousands of times he sat there. And there's my favorite mug, a heavy ceramic thing with a crack near the handle, a silly gift from him one anniversary. He'd said, "It's sturdy, like us." I've drunk my morning tea from it every day for 40 years. Up on that mantelpiece, next to a photo of Amelia on her first day of school, sits a large glass mason jar. It's nearly empty now, but once it was my bank. When I was a young mother and Thomas was working 2 jobs, I waitressed at night. Every single coin I earned in tips, every quarter, every dime, went into that jar. It clinked and shone under the lamplight, a quiet promise to my little girl. That money paid for her violin lessons, for the dress she wore to her first dance, for the down payment on her first sensible car. I remember the weight of it in my hands when I'd pour it out to count. It felt like hope. It felt like sacrifice. Amelia has a different life now. She married Richard, a man whose smile is as sharp and cold as the crease in his trousers. They live in a glass palace on the other side of town, a place with white marble floors that echo your footsteps and art on the walls that costs more than this entire house. The one time I visited for dinner, I felt like a museum piece, something old and out of place. There were no chipped mugs in her kitchen, only delicate porcelain cups you were afraid to breathe on. She never mentioned the mason jar. I suppose a memory like that is too cluttered, too poor for a life like hers. I also have my pearls, a simple single strand, a gift from Thomas on our 20th anniversary. They aren't grand, but their luster is deep and warm. When I wear them, I feel his hand on my shoulder. They are my dignity. It all began subtly, as the cruelest betrayals often do. The phone calls, once a daily comfort, dwindled to a weekly chore. Amelia's voice, once filled with laughter, became brisk and efficient. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Everything okay?" "Good. Richard's calling me on the other line. Talk soon." The silences on the line grew longer, heavier. I would sit in the quiet after she'd hung up, the receiver still warm in my hand, and feel a draft in the room that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the first sign of a door being closed, quietly but firmly, in my face. Then came my 80th birthday. For months I had imagined it, a small gathering in my garden, perhaps. Amelia and my 2 grandchildren, little Thomas and Sophie, their laughter chasing butterflies among my roses. I baked a lemon cake, my favorite, and waited. The day came and went. The phone did not ring. The following afternoon, a courier in a crisp uniform delivered a large, flat box. Inside was a cashmere blanket, impossibly soft and the color of pale stone. It must have cost a fortune. There was no card, only a gift receipt from a department store I couldn't even afford to walk into. I never expected what I found out later that night. My neighbor's daughter, a sweet girl named Clara, helps me with my computer sometimes. She showed me how to look at Amelia's social media page, a place of bright, smiling photographs that felt like a world away. And there it was, a picture posted on the night of my birthday. Amelia, dazzling in a silver dress, standing beside Richard. They were at a charity gala, champagne flutes in hand, their faces aglow with camera flashes. The caption read, "A wonderful night for a wonderful cause." I stared at the screen, at my daughter's smiling face, and the cashmere blanket in my lap suddenly felt as heavy and as cold as a burial shroud. She hadn't forgotten my birthday. She had chosen to ignore it. It was easier to attend a party full of strangers than to spend an hour with the woman who gave her life. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard stone in my chest. That was the first true turning point. The moment I understood I wasn't just a low priority. I was an inconvenience, a relic from a past she was actively trying to shed. A few weeks later, their sleek black car pulled into my driveway without warning. My heart, the foolish thing, gave a little leap of hope. Perhaps she had come to apologize. Perhaps I had imagined the coldness. Amelia swept in, all false brightness and hurried kisses that didn't land. Richard followed, his eyes doing a slow, deliberate sweep of the living room. "Mom, the place looks charming. So much character," he said. The word character hung in the air, a polite substitute for old and small. They didn't sit in Thomas's armchair. They perched on the edge of the sofa as if they were afraid of catching dust, or perhaps memories. Amelia chattered about the grandchildren, about a trip to Italy they were planning. But her eyes kept flicking around the room, at the water stain on the ceiling from the leak last winter, at the frayed edge of the rug. It wasn't a social call, it was an inspection. Richard was the one who broached it. He leaned forward, placing his manicured hands on his knees. "Eleanor," he began, using my first name, which he knew I disliked. "Amelia and I have been concerned about you. This is a big house for one person. The upkeep, the stairs. We've been looking into some wonderful communities. State of the art, everything taken care of for you." I felt the air leave my lungs. A community, a home. He was talking about putting me away. My chipped mug felt slick in my suddenly numb hands. "This is my home," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Thomas built that bookshelf with his own hands." Amelia reached out and patted my arm, a gesture of empty, condescending pity. "We're just thinking of what's best for you, Mom. We want you to be safe and comfortable." Safe. Comfortable. What they meant was out of the way. I saw it then, in the predatory gleam in Richard's eyes and the carefully constructed mask of concern on my daughter's face. They didn't see a home. They saw an asset. They saw a plot of land. And they saw me, its stubborn, aging guardian, as the final obstacle. I knew then that this was only the beginning. The second visit came on a Tuesday, April 3rd, a day heavy with the smell of damp earth and coming rain. This time they brought a briefcase. They sat me at my own kitchen table, the place where I had helped Amelia with her homework and listened to her girlhood secrets, and spread a sheaf of papers across the worn oak. The words on the top, in stark black letters, read, "Durable Power of Attorney." Richard did most of the talking, his voice a smooth, persuasive river of legalese that was designed to confuse. "It's just a formality, Eleanor. A way for us to manage your accounts, pay the bills from our end. It simplifies everything. If God forbid you ever had a medical issue, we could step in without any bureaucratic fuss. It's for your protection." Amelia sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Her touch felt like a weight. "Please, Mom," she murmured. "It would give me such peace of mind." Peace of mind. Whose, I wondered? Hers or mine? I looked at my daughter's face, searching for the little girl I raised, the one who cried when her pet hamster died, the one who held my hand crossing the street. I saw only a stranger wearing her face. My heart was a battleground. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to tear those papers in half. But a lifetime of loving her, of sacrificing for her, fought back. What if I was wrong? What if I was being a foolish, stubborn old woman? Refusing to sign felt like the final act of severing, the admission that my own child meant me harm. Could I live with that? And so, with a hand that trembled, I took the pen Richard offered me. I signed my name on the line he indicated. I watched him gather the pages, a flicker of triumph in his eyes, so quick I almost missed it. He estimated the total value of the property and my savings to be around $230,000, a number he uttered with a slight, almost imperceptible sneer, as if it were pocket change. They didn't stay long after that. Amelia gave me that same empty patting hug, her cheek cool and distant against mine. "We'll take care of everything now, Mom," she said. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence they left in their wake was different. It wasn't the peaceful silence of solitude. It was the predatory silence of an empty tomb. A profound and chilling sense of dread washed over me. I felt a desperate need for something real, something of Thomas. His letters. I kept them, along with our marriage license and the deed to the house, in a small, carved wooden box on his old writing desk. It was our box of secrets, of memories. I walked to the desk, my legs feeling unsteady. I picked up the old ornate skeleton key that had opened that box for 50 years. It is a terrible thing, my dears, when love is used not as a comfort, but as a key to turn in a lock against you. I slid the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. Confused, I tried again, jiggling it gently. Nothing. It felt blocked. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I leaned closer, squinting in the dim afternoon light. And then I saw it. The old familiar wrought iron keyhole was gone. In its place was a small gleaming circle of modern brass. The lock hadn't been jammed. It had been replaced. For a long moment I simply stared at the alien gleam of brass where the familiar dark iron of my husband's lock should have been. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were telling me. It was a small thing, a lock no bigger than my thumb, but it was a declaration of war. It was a border wall erected in the heart of my own home. My first instinct was to call Amelia. My hand shook as I dialed her number, the one I knew by heart. It rang and rang, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of the house, before clicking over to her automated voicemail, her voice a cheerful, recorded stranger. I tried 3 more times. Finally, on the 4th attempt, she answered, her voice clipped and impatient. "Mom, I'm in a meeting." "What is it?" I explained, my words tumbling over one another, about the lock, the key, the box. She sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance that traveled down the line and struck me like a physical blow. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mom. The old lock was rusted shut. Richard had a handyman pop over and replace it for you. It's for your own security. We have the new keys. We'll bring them by when we get a chance." The lie was so effortless, so smooth. Security. She spoke of security while robbing me of the only security I had ever known. She said it was for my protection, but I felt the bars of a cage closing around me. I hung up the phone, not with anger, but with a terrifying clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a strategy. The proof came 4 days later. I'd walked down to the local bank, the same one where Thomas and I had opened our first joint account, to withdraw a little money for groceries and my weekly knitting circle. The teller, a young woman named Brenda with kind eyes, had always been so pleasant. But on this day, her smile was strained. She typed my account number into her computer, and then her brow furrowed. She typed it again. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice low, refusing to meet my eyes. "There seems to be a hold on your account. All transactions require direct approval from the secondary party on your power of attorney." She turned the screen slightly towards me. There, in cold digital print, was his name, Richard Sterling. I felt the blood drain from my face. The humiliation was a hot, prickling wave that washed over my entire body. To be denied my own small pension, to be rendered a beggar for the money I had earned and saved, in front of this kind young woman who had always treated me with such respect. I had to go home and use the phone my daughter had so graciously provided to call my son-in-law and ask for permission to buy yarn and a loaf of bread. When I finally got a hold of him, his voice was slick with false sympathy. "Of course, Eleanor. Just tell me the amount. We have to be careful, you understand. Financial predators targeting the elderly. We're just looking out for you." He made me feel like a child, irresponsible and senile. He transferred exactly $60, not a penny more. But what he truly transferred was a message. You own nothing. "I own you." The world began to shrink after that. My old landline phone, my connection to my few remaining friends, suddenly went dead. The operator said the account had been canceled at the request of the account manager, Richard Sterling. A day later, a small box arrived. Inside was a simple prepaid mobile phone. It had exactly 2 numbers saved in its memory, Amelia and Richard. They had severed my lines of communication, cutting me off from anyone who might notice my growing isolation, anyone I might confide in. My little house, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. The familiar groan of the floorboards sounded like a warden's footsteps in the night. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of abandonment. There is no silence more profound, my dears, than the one that follows the realization that you are utterly alone, abandoned not by fate, but by the very blood you brought into this world. My only solace was my pearls. I would sit in Thomas's armchair in the evenings, the useless phone dark on the table beside me, and roll the smooth, cool beads between my fingers. They were a connection to a time when I was loved, when I was seen. They were my last bastion of dignity, a silent refusal to be erased. Clutching them, I felt not like a prisoner, but like a queen in exile, plotting her return. But I never expected how soon they would come for the kingdom itself. He came on a Thursday morning, a man with a clipboard and restless, calculating eyes. He said his name was Mr. Fields, an appraiser sent by Richard Sterling. He walked through my front door as if he already owned the place. He moved from room to room, his shoes squeaking on the wooden floors, making notes, taking measurements. He paid no mind to the photographs on the wall or the faded pencil marks on the doorframe charting Amelia's height as a child. He didn't see a life. He saw lumber and square footage. In the kitchen, he tapped a wall with his knuckle. "Good bones," he muttered to himself. But the whole structure would have to come down. The value is in the land, of course, prime for a multi-unit development. He said it so casually, this death sentence for my home, for every memory held within its walls. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching my pearls so tightly my knuckles were white. He was a vulture, and Richard had sent him to measure my home for its coffin. When he left, the house felt violated, tainted. The air was thick with the stench of their greed. That was the moment the last vestiges of my hope died. The mother in me, the one who made excuses and clung to the fantasy of her daughter's love, finally gave up the ghost. There was no misunderstanding this. They were going to take my house, put me in a facility, and erase me. And they were using my love, my trust, as the weapon to do it. Desperation is a powerful fuel. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had to get into that box. It wasn't just about the letters from Thomas anymore. It was about the deed. It was about finding proof, finding something, anything, to fight back with. I remembered Thomas's old workshop in the back of the garage, a place I hadn't entered in years. It smelled of sawdust and oil, a ghost of his presence. And there, in his old toolbox, I found it, a small leather pouch containing a set of slender, intricate metal picks. He'd used them to repair the delicate locks on antique furniture he sometimes restored. I had watched him for hours, his large, gentle hands surprisingly nimble as he worked. Now it was my turn. My hands were old and stiff, and my eyes weren't what they used to be. I carried the box into the kitchen for better light, and began. For hours, I sat at that table, my head bent in concentration, the cheap brass of the new lock glinting under the overhead light. I pushed and probed, feeling for the tiny hidden mechanisms, listening for a click that would not come. My frustration mounted with every failed attempt. I nearly gave up a dozen times, but then I would see the appraiser's face in my mind, or hear Amelia's cold voice on the phone, and a fresh wave of resolve would wash over me. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor. My fingers were sore, my back ached, and then I felt it. A tiny give, a soft click. The lock sprang open, my heart hammered against my ribs. I lifted the lid. A faint scent of dried lavender and old paper rose to meet me. Inside, everything was subtly disturbed, the neat stacks of envelopes slightly askew. Someone had been through my husband's most private thoughts. My hands trembled as I carefully lifted out the bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. Underneath them was the original deed to the house, crisp and official, with my name and Thomas's side by side. But tucked beneath that was a folded document I had never seen before. It was thick, cream-colored paper, trying to look old and important. I unfolded it. It was a will. It was purported to be the last will and testament of Thomas Vance. I scanned the dense legal text, my blood turning to ice. It claimed that upon his death, the house was to be held in trust for me for the duration of my life, but that full control, including the power to sell the property for my care and maintenance, was to be given to his daughter, Amelia Sterling, and her husband, Richard Sterling. It was dated 1 week before Thomas died. A week when he was so weak he could barely hold a pen. I looked at the signature. It was close, a masterful imitation, but it lacked the familiar, confident flourish of my husband's hand. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant forgery. As I stared at this profound, ultimate betrayal, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A sleek black car door slammed shut. They were here. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I shoved the forged will into the pocket of my cardigan, slammed the lid of the box shut, and scrambled into the small pantry off the kitchen, pulling the door until it was just a crack open. My heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I heard them enter the kitchen, their footsteps loud and confident on the linoleum. They didn't know I was home. My old car was in the garage for a repair. Their voices were unguarded, laced with a triumphant cruelty I had never heard before. "The demolition permits were approved this morning," Richard said, his voice smug. "The appraiser confirmed the land value is just shy of $500,000 once the lot is cleared. We can have her moved into Pine Meadows by the 1st of the month." Amelia laughed. It was not the sound of my daughter's laugh. It was a thin, brittle sound like glass shattering. "Perfect. She won't even know what's happening. She called again today, you know, crying about her phone line." Richard scoffed, the sound full of derision. "Let her cry. Did she ask for money?" "Of course," Amelia replied. "She wanted $50 for her knitting club." "It's actually pathetic." Then came the words that stopped my heart, the words that would be seared into my soul for eternity. "Honestly, Richard, it's a mercy," Amelia said, her voice dripping with a chilling, self-righteous certainty. "She's living in the past. This house is a ruin, just like her memories. It's time to clear it all out. We're giving her a clean slate." A clean slate. They were going to wipe away my life, my home, my past, and call it a mercy. In the suffocating darkness of that pantry, the loving, forgiving mother I had been for 50 years died a quiet, violent death. And in her place, something cold and hard and resolute began to form. They had left me with nothing, and in doing so, they had given me a terrible, clarifying freedom. I had nothing left to lose. As I stood there, silent as stone, the forged will a burning rectangle in my pocket, I heard Richard's voice again, closer this time. "I'm just going to double-check that box is secure. We can't have the old bat finding Thomas's real will before we get a chance to dispose of it properly." My breath caught in my throat. The real will. They hadn't found it. It had to be in that box, hidden somewhere they had missed. He was walking towards the desk. He would see the lock I had so clumsily picked. He would know. My entire body tensed, a primal instinct to flee warring with the cold, calculating need to remain unseen. I shifted my weight, an infinitesimal movement, and the old pantry door hinge let out a soft, betraying groan. The footsteps stopped. The silence in the kitchen stretched, taut and sharp as a razor's edge. "Did you hear that?" Richard whispered. In the ringing silence that followed Richard's whisper, I held my breath until my lungs burned. Every creak of the old house sounded like a thunderclap. My fate hung suspended in that single terrifying moment. Then Amelia's voice, dismissive and light. "Darling, it's just the house settling. It's 100 years old, what do you expect? It's probably groaning with relief that we're finally going to put it out of its misery." Her laugh was a shard of ice in the warm kitchen air. Richard grunted, convinced. I heard his footsteps move away from the desk, towards the front of the house. I waited, a statue carved from fear, until I heard the distinct final click of the front door closing and the sound of their car engine fading into the night. Only then did I allow my body to move. I stumbled out of the pantry, my legs weak, the forged will clutched in my hand like a venomous snake. I looked around the room, at my chipped mug by the sink, at Thomas's armchair, at the fading photographs on the mantelpiece. They were no longer objects of comfort. They were evidence of a life my own daughter was trying to bury. There was no time for tears. Grief was a luxury I could not afford. The woman who had wept over a cold phone call was gone. In her place was a woman with a mission. I walked calmly to the desk, took the entire wooden box, grabbed my purse and the strand of pearls from my jewelry box, and walked out the back door, leaving the home I had built for 50 years behind me. I would not return as a prisoner awaiting her sentence. I would return as a judge, ready to deliver one. I took a bus across town, the city lights blurring past the window like forgotten memories. There was only one person I could trust, one person who knew Thomas's heart as well as I did. Arthur Abernathy, my husband's best friend and a retired attorney, lived in a small apartment overflowing with books and the smell of old leather. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, wild-eyed and clutching a wooden box to my chest, his kind, wrinkled face crumpled with concern. "Eleanor? Good heavens, child, what's happened?" Inside, over a cup of tea his hands insisted I have, I told him everything. I laid the story out piece by piece, my voice low and steady, stripped of all emotion. It was a clinical report of a murder, the murder of a mother's love. When I finished, I placed the forged will on the table between us. Arthur stared at it, his face a mask of cold fury. "The avaricious little monsters," he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "To do this to you, to Thomas's memory." He then looked at the box. "May I?" I nodded. He ran his fingers over the new, cheap lock that had so terrified me. With a simple letter opener from his desk, he pried it off in less than a minute. "Amateurs," he grunted. He opened the lid and we began to search. I never would have found what he discovered in a million years. He carefully lifted the velvet lining at the bottom of the box. Taped to the wood beneath was a single sealed envelope. Thomas's familiar, strong handwriting was on the front. It simply said, "For my Ellie, the real one." Inside was my husband's true will. It was a simple, handwritten document, but it was dated, signed, and witnessed by Arthur himself and another friend long since passed. It left everything he owned, his entire worldly estate, including the house and his savings, to me, his beloved wife, Eleanor Vance, unconditionally. The forgery wasn't just cruel. It was a clumsy, desperate, and deeply illegal crime. And we had the proof. Abernathy's mind, once freed from the shock, became a beautiful and dangerous machine. He began to pace his small living room, the gears turning. A police report would be clean, he said, thinking aloud. They would be charged, likely convicted. But prison is a sterile punishment. It lacks poetry. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw the same fire I felt in my own heart. He understood. This was not just about justice. This was about retribution. The humiliation they had planned for me, to be cast aside as a senile old woman, would be returned to them tenfold. And so we devised a plan. Not a plan of lawyers and courtrooms, but a piece of theater, a final act to be performed on a stage of their own choosing. The next day, from Arthur's apartment, I made the call. I pitched my voice to sound frail, defeated. I told Amelia she was right, that I was tired of being a burden. I agreed that the assisted living community was the best option. Then I delivered the bait. "Could we have one last family dinner at the house?" I asked, forcing a pathetic tremor into my voice. "Just the three of us, so I can say a proper goodbye to the place." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line. Then, I could almost hear the smug, triumphant smile in her voice. "Of course, Mom, that's a wonderful idea. We'll be there Saturday night." She was so confident, so arrogant in her victory, that she didn't even question it. They had no idea they were accepting an invitation to their own execution. And I discovered something I should have known much sooner. I was an excellent actress. There is no greater arrogance than that of the thief who believes his victim is not only robbed, but is also a fool. It is a pride that builds the gallows from which they will hang. They grew bolder in the days leading up to the dinner. Richard, through a formal letter drafted by his lawyer, informed me that a potential buyer for the property, a Mr. Harrison from a major development firm, would be joining us for the meal to finalize the preliminary agreement. They were not even waiting for me to be gone. They were going to sign the deal for my home's destruction right in front of me, a final twist of the knife. I agreed to everything. I was the very picture of compliance. On that Saturday, Arthur drove me to the house hours before they were due to arrive. Walking through my front door felt different. It was no longer a prison, but my fortress. I spent the afternoon cooking. A beautiful roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the scent of apple pie filling the rooms. I was setting the stage, creating an illusion of warm domesticity, of final, gentle surrender. I set the dining table with the good china and polished silver. At the center of the table, I placed the old mason jar, empty save for a few forgotten dusty coins at the bottom. When I was done, I went to my room and put on a simple blue dress. And then I fastened Thomas's pearls around my neck. They felt cool against my skin, no longer just a comfort, but a suit of armor. They arrived precisely at 7, Amelia was wearing a silk dress that shimmered under the light, Richard a suit so sharp it could cut glass. They were followed by a portly, florid man in an expensive coat, Mr. Harrison, the developer. They moved through my house with the air of conquerors. "Eleanor, you've outdone yourself," Richard said, patting my shoulder with a repulsive, patronizing familiarity. "It all smells delicious." Amelia glided through the rooms with Mr. Harrison, pointing out the potential of the space, her voice dripping with false sentiment about her childhood memories. They treated me like the hired help, a ghost already fading from the scene. We sat down to dinner. I served them, my hands perfectly steady. I watched them eat the food I had prepared, listened to them toast their future success with wine they had brought, their laughter echoing off the walls that had once rung with my own child's joy. They spoke of demolition schedules and condominium layouts as if I wasn't even there, and I let them. I let them drink their wine and fill their bellies and bask in the warmth of their greed. Finally, when the plates were cleared and Richard was leaning back in his chair, swirling the last of his wine and boasting to Harrison about the seamlessness of the transition, I stood up. I placed my hands on the back of my chair. My voice, when I spoke, was not the frail whisper they had grown accustomed to. It was clear, calm, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Before we have dessert," I announced to the startled room, "there is a small piece of family business to attend to." On that cue, the back door opened and Arthur Abernathy walked in. He looked like a gentle old man, a bit stooped, holding his hat in his hands. Richard and Amelia looked at him with pure annoyance, their perfect evening interrupted by another relic from the past. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded. I did not answer him. I walked to the sideboard, picked up the forged will, and placed it on the center of the dining table. "Richard, Amelia, I believe this is yours." A flicker of panic crossed their faces. Before they could speak, I placed Thomas's handwritten will directly beside it. "And this," I said, my voice ringing with a power I did not know I possessed, "was my husband's." Arthur stepped forward. His voice was no longer that of a gentle old man, but of the sharp, incisive lawyer he once was. He explained in excruciating detail the legal definitions of forgery, wire fraud, and felony elder abuse. He explained how a power of attorney obtained through deceit is null and void. He laid out the prison sentences they would face. The color drained from Richard's face. Amelia began to stammer, to cry, her beautiful mask cracking. "Mom, this is a misunderstanding. We were only trying to help." I held up a hand, and she fell silent. I turned my gaze upon the developer, who looked as if he had swallowed a stone. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice level and cold, "you have been brought here tonight under false pretenses. These two individuals have attempted to sell you a property that they do not and will never own. They have done so by forging a legal document and attempting to have me, the sole legal owner, unlawfully committed. The power of attorney they showed you was revoked this afternoon. I suggest you leave before you become an accessory to their crimes." Mr. Harrison stared at Amelia and Richard with utter disgust, threw his linen napkin onto his plate, and stormed out of my house without another word. The $500,000 deal vanished with him. Defeated, utterly and completely, they signed the full confession and renunciation of all claims that Arthur placed before them. There was nothing left to say. I walked to the mantelpiece, picked up the old dusty mason jar, and held it out to my daughter. "You forgot this, Amelia," I said quietly. "All those coins, all those years, it was the down payment. It seems it was a poor investment." I looked at the two of them, these hollowed-out strangers. "Now," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any shout. "Get out of my house." They left, stumbling out into the darkness, stripped not only of their prize but of their dignity. I stood in the quiet of my home, the scent of apple pie still hanging in the air. The silence was finally my own again. It was the silence of peace, of victory. In the end, they did not destroy my home. They revealed its strength. They did not erase my past. They forced me to reclaim it. They thought because I was old, I was weak. They thought because I was a mother, I was a fool. They learned that the deepest love, when betrayed, can forge the hardest steel. If my story has taught you anything, my dears, let it be this: never let anyone convince you that your life, your memories, your history are worthless. Cherish your own chipped mugs and strands of pearls, for they are the symbols of a life well lived. They are not weaknesses, they are your strength. And if you ever find yourself in the dark, remember that you have the power to light your own way home. Thank you for listening to this old woman's story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a little courage today. And don't forget to subscribe. This old heart has a few more truths yet to tell.